United, and Emily Wright of River Valley Organizing. That does it for our show. Democracy Now! Is produced with Renee Feltz, Mike Burke, Dina Guzder, Messiah Rhodes, Nermeen Sheikh, Maria Tarasena, Tammy Warrenoff, Charina Nadura, Sam Alcoff, Maria Studio, John Hamilton, Ravi Karan, Hani Masood, and Sanjay Lopez. Our executive director is Julie Crosby. Happy birthday, Brendan Allen. I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez.
The viewpoints expressed in this program are the opinions of the people expressing them and are not necessarily those of Fresh Air Incorporated, its staff, or its board of directors.
I'm Al McFarlane. Welcome to The Conversation with Al McFarlane. I'm glad to be here and glad to have you along as well. I want to begin by inviting all of you listening here on KFAI and those who are connecting with us across the various social media platforms to really join me, be a partner in creating community. And I ask you to do that by jumping over to the Insight YouTube channel, YouTube Insight News. That's where we are sort of home basing this program for social media networks. And I want you to subscribe, to like it, and to share it. And my real hope is that you'll help me grow our subscriber base from around 300 now to about 1,000, and as soon as possible. So this is a personal invitation to every listener here on KFAI and to all of those who may be joining the program today or any day, because we're on 5 days a week. If you're checking us out through Twitter or through LinkedIn or through Facebook, take a minute, go over to the YouTube Insight channel, watch the program from there, but mostly subscribe, share, and like. Well, thank you. I'm going to begin today with what we call our hot topic. And our first hot topic is about a story that's in Insight News about what's happening in one of the largest growing Black communities in Minnesota. We normally think of Minneapolis and St. Paul, rightly so, as the significant Black communities, but Brooklyn Park, Brooklyn Center have been in the national limelight for a bit because of both racial tensions, but also because of the emerging new majorities taking place, majorities of people of color. And in particular, Brooklyn Park is a city where whites are now in the minority and where a combination of Blacks and Latinos and Asians make up the majority. It's a city, a community bordering North Minneapolis where they elected a Black mayor, and they also have a majority of people of color on the city council, including the mayor. Well, recently there was a story in our paper this week headlined "Brooklyn Park Looks at Cultural Relevance in Deciding Award for Official Newspaper Contract." Now, you all know that most towns have an official newspaper where all of the minutes of the meetings and minutes of the business dealings of the city are published. Purpose being that they want to have transparency where people know what their government is doing. And Brooklyn Park, like other communities, has that same situation. And for the past so many years, the paper of record or the city newspaper has been the Sun Post chain organization. And the new leadership at the city, particularly one city council member named Boyd Morrison, has been raising the question about how much the current official newspaper reflects the cultural reality, the cultural composition of the community. And so it's a question being raised. And out of that, the city went out to other ethnic newspapers, including my own Insight News, and asked if we would be interested or should we apply for the status of newspaper? So I want to share that because it's important. And, it's important because we take certain things for granted. And there's business involved here. I think the contract for community legal notices and bids and public notices, it's not big, but it is big. It's like $20,000, $30,000 a year. And there are rules for what makes state rules for what makes a legal newspaper or official newspaper, and there are local rules as well. And so the council members, in questioning how much the overall news value is for the current contractor, asked about how they develop relationships with media that reflect the change in demographics. So that's the bottom line. So I'm going to ask you to just read the story in Insight News and look in the future at what happens there, because it could be part of a trend of organizations like city governments reckoning the historic exclusion of their coverage or their engagement of assets in the Black community or communities of color, and their attempt to do something about it by opening the door of opportunity to other people that have been left out by virtue of generally the old boy network, where everybody, could have had their relationships guide what they do and decisions they made. That may be changing somewhat now. Well, let me continue today by inviting my guest today, dear friend and an elder and a leader and a fellow communicator in the community. And that's brother, I call him Ndugu Yusuf Mjini. Yusuf is a formidable communicator, executive, a leader in community, one of the leaders in the NAACP. And he and I have a history of talking and doing communications and civic engagement over at least a couple of generations. Yusuf, good afternoon. Welcome again to
Good afternoon, brother.
McFarlane.
How you be?
I am well. How are you?
Not bad, not bad. I'm coming to the end of recovery from pneumonia, which I acquired in my frequent trips to medical facilities, hospital-acquired pneumonia. But I treat it as a nuisance rather than an earth-ending event, Al. You have to, man up and go forward, and that's what I'm trying to do. Interesting, we've been engaged in conversations, we being the Minnesota Dakota Area Conference NAACP, with representatives of the Brooklyn Center, Brooklyn Park community, who are interested in establishing their own NAACP chapter, which is, I think, a strong indication of the growth and the activism that has taken place within that community. So we look forward to working with them and having them join the other 7 local and state chapters of the NAACP in Minnesota and the Dakotas.
Well, Yusuf, thank you. Today we want to talk about the question of American history. It's a hot topic as well, important hot button issue in the country now. So the question is, how do we teach our past? And let's talk about American history and what we can call the educational divide. And among the things that I'd like for you and I to talk about, I've got an article that I'll put up that talks about students walking out after being told to limit their Black History program. That's one.
In Alabama, right?
Yeah. Also, another article that talks about, as red states target Black history lessons, blue states embrace them. That's interesting. And then a piece out of the Miami Herald that talks about the same issue. So generally, in describing today's program, we want to go over the fact that it seems like we have to weigh what it means for our community when a governor tries to ban an entire area of study from the public school system. Republicans have made how race is taught in the U.S. Education system a hotly debated topic. The recent ban on AP African American Studies by Florida Governor Ron DeSantis has created student protests linked at Hillcrest High School in Alabama, linked to that. and has all that sparks a new round of discussions about state education and the U.S. Yusuf, go ahead.
Well, I think beneath what we see and hear on the surface is the fact that this has become a flashpoint in the upcoming presidential elections, particularly among Republican candidates who are attempting to distance themselves from what appears to be a large field that will eventually be running for the Republican endorsement. Former President Trump has called for parents to elect and fire school principals, which is part of the overall parent rights movement. And you mentioned Ron DeSantis banning instruction on the AP Black History class, but he's also banned instruction on sexual orientation and gender identity in kindergarten through third grade. Nikki Haley, former UN ambassador, who's most well known as governor of South Carolina, is among the Republicans taking aim at critical race theory. And in the opening stages of the 2024 presidential race, the parents' right movement and lessons for students, school children, are emerging as significant flashpoints. And the issues related to racism, sexuality, and education is a way for potential White House hopefuls, as I said, to distinguish themselves in a crowded field, suggesting new and deeper ways for government to shape what happens in local classrooms. Mike Pence, former vice president, is widely considered to be planning a presidential run himself. And he has established a group that is going to run ads in Iowa, where the state Supreme Court in Iowa is examining gender issues. And they're going to be focusing on transgender bathroom rights and gender identity studies. And so they've wrapped this notion of sexuality and racism together to try and capitalize on the fervor that's been whipped up among conservative Republicans about what's being taught in American schools. So it is a very serious issue. And when we talk about DeSantis, he also signed the Stop Woke Act of 2022 that restricted the teaching that members of one race are inherently racist or should feel guilty about past actions by other people of the same race, among other things. And they're wrapping these concerns beneath the umbrella of critical race theory. And DeSantis has also announced plans to restrict colleges in Florida from having programs on diversity, equity, and inclusion. So this deals with purchasing, with admissions, with curriculum, with recruitment, with the entire span of students of color, BIPOC students, faculty, and staff engaging in higher education in the state of Florida.
Let me share part of an article I've got pulled up that brings what you're saying to light. This is an article in the Miami Herald, and this is from their issue today, as a matter of fact. The headline says, DeSantis says, maybe Florida can do without College Board, without AP classes and the SAT test. And it says tens of thousands of Florida high school students take the advanced placement courses every year to have a competitive edge heading into college. Now, Governor Ron DeSantis says he wants to reevaluate the state's relationship with the College Board, the private company that administers those courses, and the SAT exam. And that has some high school students worried. Open quote, I don't see how I could have gotten ahead without them, said Eli Rhodes, a senior at Pasco County's Mitchell High School, who said AP courses helped him get a full scholarship to the University of Alabama. Sure. You almost have to have these courses to stand out, that student said. DeSantis, on the other hand, has not made clear exactly what he plans to change, but his remarks come after the College Board on Saturday accused his administration of playing politics when it rejected its new advanced placement African American Studies course over allegations that it lacked or lacks educational value. This College Board, like nobody elected them to anything, DeSantis said at a news conference Monday in Naples. They're just kind of there, and they provide a service. And so you can either utilize the services or not. That's his way of dismissing the College Board. You can read more of this online at the Miami Herald. So go ahead, Yusuf. You know, it's education as the tip of the spear, but you've described it being as part of a broad initiative that has to remind us of Reconstruction, right?
Correct. And it's driven by what they are trying to take over and define as critical race theory, the teaching of anything about race that doesn't involve white supremacy. Okay, so it can be indigenous American history, it can be Mexican American history, African American history. They don't want anything taught which they perceive is going to make white students feel guilty or uncomfortable. In short, they don't want us teaching the truth. And this ignores the total reality of the miseducation of the Negro, the book that Carter G. Woodson wrote early in the last century that outlines that the worst form of lynching was what happened to Negro students in American schools for 150 years after the Emancipation Proclamation, as though it wasn't uncomfortable for us to be ignorant, for our history to be absent, for the stereotypes, for the misinformation, for the negative tropes, and the kind of self-hatred that resulted from the attention that was given to African American students or African American history in public schools. And this is a very, very serious issue. And within our community, within most communities of color, the highest respect is for preachers and teachers. So, there has been kind of a let alone given to education of any form, whether it was private, religious, public, by parents of color who suffered from marginal educations themselves. And I think that Native Americans are probably the best example of this, because if you mention schools, this brings up the horror that they experienced in the boarding schools, in the religious schools, where they were beaten and punished and even wrapped in blankets that were impregnated with smallpox for speaking their native language, for practicing Native American culture, history, and just the unity of being with and among their own people and practicing the culture that they grew up with. So they want to erase all of that, everything absent white supremacy, white privilege, from the educational curriculum to poison the minds of, and see, here's the thing. A lot of white people don't understand that racism hurts them too, okay? Because it imposes negative inferiority images on low-income children and children of color, and it imposes negative superiority images on white children and people, Caucasians. And as I talk to the captains of industry, the people who run the Fortune 500 companies, they say, Yusuf, look, we're looking for people that we can put on a fast track to promotion and management who can build the capacity of the people that report to them to make the most money or the most services, provide the best services possible within their division. We need people who can work with women, who can work with immigrants, who can work with people of different abilities, who are comfortable in communicating and supervising people of color. And if they come out of a monocultural white environment, they're no good at that. They can't do it, and we can't use them, and we can't put them on a fast track to management. So the ultimate result of this fear of critical race theory, or the accurate teaching of American history, colonial expansionism and all the rest, slavery, the fact that the 1980 census was the first time in 100 years that the population of Native Americans in this country exceeded 1 million. And it was more than 18 million when the Pilgrims landed at Plymouth Rock. That's as close to and far worse than the kind of genocide that was practiced in Nazi Germany.
Mm-hmm.
So racism hurts white people too, regardless of how well intentioned it may be. And in a nutshell, one white politician had the decency and the honesty to say that this may be the last presidential election that white people really have the opportunity to determine the outcome. Okay, so they want to do anything they can to whip up this fervor among, the Trump people, the deplorables, the white conservatives, to get out and marshal their forces, because they see, that they've included everybody possible in the definition of white, who in our lifetime, Al, were not considered white, were considered colored people, are now being considered white people. They're doing everything possible to get anybody willing to dominate that they are two or more races, so they can dilute and water down,
Right.
the federal largesse that gets distributed based on proportionality in terms of the census, so that they can wipe out, the old Brill Cream rule, little drop will do you, the one drop rule.
One drop rule was a way to disenfranchise and
Thank you.
prevent wealth creation in the Black community. But now they're changing.
Now they want to use it to create this category called two or more races, okay, or biracial. And so that lowers the actual percentage of the population who identify as African American, Native American, et cetera, and Asian American, and creates this other category that they can't really conceptualize or categorize or make any use of, which really dilutes and waters down the proportional representation of other groups that have been considered people of color, indigenous, et cetera, for all their lives. And we see specific actions being directed at the Somali community, at the African community. And say, no, I'm not Black, not African American. I'm Liberian, I'm Somali, I'm Nigerian. I'm not part of that group, okay? And we see that in terms of purchasing, we see it in terms of culture, in terms of interaction. And if we see it in the classroom, in the curriculum, where it's non-existent, it's going to perpetuate itself to create more division and less unity among us collectively. So it's
I'm Al McFarlane.
issue.
I'm Al McFarlane. You're listening to The Conversation with Al McFarlane. My guest is Ndugu Yusef Mjini. Yusef is both a dear friend and a masterful communicator, organizer, a light in the activism and civic engagement, civic responsibility community, and in the communications industry as well. Yusef, let me share another thing we can talk about. In the same vein, I have an article here from ABC News about students walk out after told to limit Black History program. And this kind of, again, is another way to focus in on our topic today about history and education. The article was published on February 9th by the Associated Press. And again, I'm reading it from a PDF from ABC News. It's got a Tuscaloosa, Alabama dateline. It says more than 200 students walked out of a class at an Alabama high school after they say they were told by school leaders to omit certain relevant events from an upcoming student-led Black History Month program. However, school officials have denied the allegations, even while acknowledging the need for students' concerns to be heard. Students told WBMA TV that they were ordered to leave out major historical moments, including slavery and the civil rights movement, from the program that was scheduled for February 22nd at Hillcrest High School in Tuscaloosa. The students were told they, open quote, couldn't talk about slavery and civil rights because one of our administrators felt uncomfortable, close quote, said Black History Month program board member Janaya Suttles, a senior who participated in Wednesday's walkout. She said that the direction from a school administrator left her hurt. Quoting her, she said, "My protector from 8 a.m. to 3:15, for you to tell me I can't talk about something that's dealing with my culture is very disturbing. It's very confusing." Fellow Hillcrest senior Jada Holt expressed similar emotions. She said, "Why am I being censored about my culture, something that is rooted in me? Why can't I talk about it? History is history, and it's already been made, and it cannot be erased." Senior Jemiah Brown, who helped put the program together, organized the walkout, which lasted about an hour. Jemiah Brown said, "Without our history, we are nothing. Without teaching our youth where we come from, how can we move forward?" Well, I applaud these students and the student movement around the country. Yusuf, what do you think? What are your impressions about how students are handling, resisting this oppressive effort to suppress their identity, the knowledge they have, and the knowledge that they're seeking to uncover and grow in? What do you think?
Well, first of all, we need to salute and support those students, okay, because that took a lot of courage, and they have every right to do that. And this notion of making people uncomfortable, I'd like to just share something with you, because this is not just an incident in red states or in Alabama. The NAACP received a letter from a teacher who resigned her position in a school district in central Minnesota. And if you wouldn't mind, I'd like to read just a little bit about what that teacher sent to the NAACP.
No, please.
Requesting assistance. She said that she quit because she was frustrated that the principal in her school told her she was too woke, that she was too sensitive to issues of racism. And the reason why the teacher resigned is because the students were using the N-word, white students, in her classroom toward African-American students. She wrote the students up and put them on lunchtime detention. And the principal in the school overruled her and took the students off of detention. Now, interestingly enough, this principal has a son who is African-American. And I suspect, I'm only guessing, that that is an adopted son, but these white students would gather around that black student and make monkey noises that echoed throughout the halls for all the students to hear, because they knew that there were absolutely no consequences for doing it. So after the teacher resigned, the students were calling her at home and saying that they had a substitute teacher who taught a lesson called The Positive Impact of Slavery, and said that, if the slaves had 3 hots and a cot, they had food, they had clothing, what more could they want? And she said that owning slaves was like owning Gucci, that it was good for the economy, okay? And that we should look to find the positive aspects in slavery rather than dwelling on what people viewed as the uncomfortable or negative aspects. So we have put that person in contact with the local NAACP in their area, whose jurisdiction this is taking place in, and have also informed the Commissioner of Education, who is an African-American named Willie Jett here in the state of Minnesota. And I am reminded that it was the Children's Crusade, when most of the Black people in the civil rights movement in the South had been arrested, that the children, as young as 2nd, 3rd grade, went downtown and got arrested, got put in school buses and taken to temporary holding pens, because they said, we're not going to give up, and you can arrest our parents, but you're going to have to arrest us too. We can't vote, but we can come out here and march and support the right to vote. And that's, brings us to the reality that Black or African American history is as much a part of American history.
Mhm.
We've commented on this program in the past that 12 of the first 16 presidents owned slaves. 18 of the first 30 justices of the Supreme Court owned slaves. More than 300 of the first 60 years of the U.S. government, members of Congress, formerly owned or currently owned enslaved people. When the Supreme Court voted on Plessy v. Ferguson, there were members of the Supreme Court at that time who had owned slaves during their lifetime. So slavery is inherently a part of the establishment of this country. When you look at the economy, some economists estimate that as much as 75 cents out of every dollar in the gross national product was a direct result of the fact that slavery and those people who were enslaved, our ancestors, were 7 times more valuable than all the banks, all the mills, all the major companies and corporations in the United States of America at that time. This was a slave economy. Slaves picked the cotton in the South. It was shipped to the North, where it was used in mills, or where it was then shipped all around the world for clothing, for textiles. Cotton was king, is what everybody said. And when the Emancipation Proclamation occurred, most of the South had been burned down, including the crops and the factories and corporations, and it was a cotton economy. They said, how are we going to rebuild the Southern economy? So they cut a deal with the Democrats to back person for president in exchange for the removal of troops from the South. And they implemented these Jim Crow labor laws where if a Black person was unemployed or was talking too loud in the presence of white people, there's a good documentary called Slavery by Another Name that talks about the system of peonage that was implemented in local communities and states in the South, where Black people were railroaded into jail and were then leased out as convict labor to some of the major corporations in America today. U.S. Steel had prisoners on work release shoveling coal in the mines to fuel, the establishment of United States Steel, the steel industry.
Let me come back to that, Yusuf. Let me go back to something you brought up earlier, though. And you talked about the question of presently the Republicans in general, but a lot of whites, I think, through their spokespersons are saying they don't want to be made to feel uncomfortable. So the question is it our job, the job of Black people, Black students, Black families, to make white people comfortable? And why does it always come up? Question number one, why does it always come up? Why is it always their focus about their level of comfort? You addressed it a little bit, but I want to sit with that a little bit longer. And then the second part of the question, Yusuf, is how then do we prepare our children to deal with this pushback that we've seen before, but it's a pushback about our culture, about our identity, about our very existence. And we know the script. You kind of referred to it earlier, how the colonizers decimated a continent of people from 18 million to almost none. That resilience and human spirit in them resulting in the reemergence of their physical bodies, up to 1 million now, but almost annihilated, extinct in North America. Sure. And you also referred to it in how, our enslavement created for them a renewable energy source.
Sure.
And so they were breeders, treating our people with the principles of husbandry, right? Of farming. Yeah. And so that's the discussion that they don't want to have. It's a discussion that we have to have, certainly between us, but we have to have that conversation broadly, boldly, publicly, And at some point in time, they got to be involved in the conversation too, whether they want to or not, whether they're comfortable or not. But what do you think is our obligation to make white people comfortable?
Well, James Baldwin said, Al, that not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced. And if we're interested in and supportive of the truth, as I said, our history is a part of American history. It is an inherent, essential, deeply critical and connected part of everything that this country represents. And we can't really tell the truth about America without acknowledging, the original cardinal sin of this country, slavery and genocide. One group of people was annihilated, the other group was enslaved. And, hell, the Haitian Revolution is the reason why Napoleon sold what we refer to as the Louisiana Purchase. Everything from the Mississippi River to the Rocky Mountains, from the Canadian border to the Gulf of Mexico, for literally nothing, $15 million. Purchased all of that land and doubled the size of the United States, which fueled the Western expansion, the land rushes, the grab, the colonial settler movement in the western half of this country. And it must be taught and acknowledged for any of us, black, white, whatever color, whatever persuasion, to have a legitimate and full understanding of ourselves. Where we come from and how we got to where we're at defines where we have yet to go. And people who don't understand their history have no path or roadmap toward the future. And it can't be attained by masking or hiding or lying or assuming that history began last week and everything is lovely and we're going to go forward. We have to instill the fact of American history and our history, which are truly intertwined, with our children, whether we have to do it at home, across the dinner table, or in the living room, or on birthdays and Black History Month throughout the year, or whether it occurs in the school. Much of what we have to do about American history is to undo the information that is promoted to us. Mm-hmm. And Howard Zinn wrote one of the best books. That's one that they're seeking to ban early on, about history and the establishment of America. And Maistre is saying the Haitian Revolution scared every colonial power in the Americas, and they're still paying. The Haitians invited the French president to come to the 200th anniversary of the Haitian Revolution. You know what his message was? It still hurts. It's still too painful. We won't be there. We can't do it. And people don't realize that Haiti has been paying reparations to France over the income that the French Catholic plantation owners lost when the slaves achieved freedom for more than 100 years. And people wonder why the country is so poor and so backward, apart from the earthquakes. They had to pay France for their own liberation because they liberated they liberated Haiti in the Haitian Revolution, defeated the French, the British, and the English, and expelled them from the country, and then were forced by the United States, by France, and by England to pay reparations to France, to pay reparations to the French government for more than 100 years.
Well, it's like American slaveholders also received taxpayer
reparations. Absolutely. Absolutely. For lost income. Yeah. Unbelievable. Mm-hmm. And we were promised 40 acres and a mule. It's the only time any people were ever set free with absolutely nothing. We didn't do that to the Germans after World War II. We didn't do that to the Japanese. It's never been done to a defeated power, okay, except to us, okay? And when talking about reparations, and I don't know if you've had that, but that would be a beautiful discussion to open up and have. What is reparations? Who's entitled to it? Mm-hmm. What number has to appear on a check? They've estimated the economic looting of African Americans at 14 to 20 trillion dollars, which would mean every African descendant of slavery in this country would be awarded a check for a minimum of $350,000. Okay, we've paid reparations to the Japanese because of the internment camps during World War II. Germany has paid reparations to Israel and to Jewish people for the atrocities committed there. It's a conversation that white people don't want to have. It's very uncomfortable. And I'm not sure personally what amount you could put on a check that would make us say, okay, all is forgiven and forgotten. We'll never bring it up again. Thank you so much.
Let me bring back the topic that we're on to start with, though. I'm Al McFarlane. This is The Conversation with Al McFarlane. My guest is Ndugu Yusuf Mjini, and I hope you're enjoying what I call a robust conversation, a rich conversation. I want to add one more report that I've read. We pulled today a report from the Washington Post published February 13th, and it's written by reporter Hannah Nathanson. The headline says, "As red states target Black history lessons, blue states embrace them." The subhead is that the lessons school children receive are diverging based on where they live. She writes, "Even as lessons on Black history draw complaints from Republican governors who argue the instruction is ideological, several blue states are moving in the opposite direction, mandating classes in African American, Latino, and Puerto Rican studies, and setting up a uniquely American division over how we teach our past. Since 2019, partly in response to the murder of George Floyd, at least 4 reliably Democratic states, those being Connecticut, Delaware, Maine, and Rhode Island, have passed laws requiring instruction on Black history, according to a database maintained by the research agency Education Commission of the States. Connecticut's law says that African American, Puerto Rican, and Latino studies must be included in the social studies component of all public school curriculums. Delaware's mandates that school districts offer instruction on Black history, and Maine's says that African American studies and the history of genocide must be included in state testing standards. Rhode Island orders schools to include a unit on African history and heritage. I'll read another paragraph or two. It says in the past 3 years, an additional 7 states have passed laws establishing K-12 courses in ethnic studies on Native American, Asian American, or Filipino history per the Education Commission's database. Meanwhile, Republican state governors and administrations spent the weeks leading up to Black History Month this year interrogating how or if teachers should discuss aspects of race, racism, and American history in the classroom. Last paragraph. In Virginia, state education officials appointed by Governor Glenn Youngkin, Republican, proposed shifting the focus of a state history curriculum away from Black and Native peoples in a revision process that is ongoing. In Arkansas, Governor Sarah Huckabee Sanders issued a January executive order barring teachers from delivering certain messages about race, and in Florida, which has already passed restrictive laws similar to the Arkansas order, Governor Ron DeSantis, flayed a proposed AP African American Studies course, tried to shred it, after which the College Board altered that curriculum to exclude lessons on Black Lives Matter. 18 state laws similarly circumscribe what teachers can say about race and the country's history of race relations, and those laws have taken effect over the past 3 years, according to a tally compiled by Washington Post. Where does that lead us, Yusuf? So the tension is what's happening, maybe in the North that we could say could be positive, though I question that reporter's analysis. The data suggests something different, but being in the North, being in Minnesota, I still question the genuineness of northern states posturing about inclusiveness. But what do you think?
Well, I retired from St. Paul Public Schools 13 years ago. And when I retired, there was only one high school teacher in the district who was teaching Black history, and that was Sebastian J. Sam Hernandez, Mexican-American individual. He's 94 years old now. Hell of a teacher and a great individual. And this all started in 2000 when George Bush, the younger Bushman, signed into law the No Child Left Behind Act, which really focused on teaching to the material that was on the test. And history was not a part of that. The recent shift to social issues in schools is an outgrowth of somebody who you mentioned in that Washington Post article, Glenn Youngkin, who in 2021 became the first Republican in more than a decade to be elected as Virginia's governor. He is also a potential candidate in 2024, and he campaigned largely on parental rights and appealed to parents frustrated over school closures during the pandemic and said he would ban the teaching of critical race theory in the public schools. Now, you talked about where these folks are at. Among Republicans, 8 in 10 said that gender identity, remember that's wrapped with race in this argument, 8 in 10 Republicans said gender identity is taught too much in the schools. 56% of those Republicans said the same thing about racism. Now, among Democrats, 2/3 said there's too little taught about racism, but there was less consensus about teaching gender identity. 4 in 10 Democrats said too little is taught. 2 in 10 said too much, and about 4 in 10 schools, 4 in 10 said schools handled it about right. Now, this was also from a Washington Post article of February 11th. And the title of that article, for people who want to look it up, is Schools Become Flashpoint for Republicans Eyeing the White House. It is clearly going to be a hotbed issue in the forthcoming elections. And I think it's good that states are pushing back. I think one of the major players in this, what is the one common ingredient that's been in the classrooms for the last 150 years, Al?
You tell me.
The teachers and the children. So we've got to encourage teachers' unions to become part of this discussion and part of this fight, because many teachers are scared to death, particularly in red states, that someone is looking over their shoulder, and if they do anything that can even remotely be considered or blamed on critical race theory, that it may cost them their job. So what are they doing? They're going right down the middle of the road like yellow stripes and dead armadillos. They're not willing to even broach these conversations in the classroom for fear that a student may go home and tell their parents, and it may get to the school board, and it may get to the principal, and their contract may not be renewed next year. So it's intended to frighten, and I think it has, teachers, from even broaching the subject. And part of the difficulty, Al, is that in teacher preparation programs, teachers are unable even to facilitate a discussion about these topics because of the absence of any training, knowledge, or experience or relations with the very cultures that we're talking about. So if they can't facilitate a discussion on race or gender identity or true American history, they're not going to have it. No. Let's talk about race.
How do we get the unions and our people to step up in the unions, and then the unions to step up on behalf of our interests, our history, our truth? And here's the dilemma. Mm-hmm. On the one hand, we've got a kind of touch and go relationship with organized labor. Number one, we've been at the center of it, always pushing the principle in our organization of organized labor, of organization to reflect the interest of the laborers. We pushed that even though the official unions tried to keep our people at bay and out of power within their power dynamic, present for the count, but not present to lead or to reflect our unique and distinct values and interests. So on the one hand, we want to empower teachers organized in unions to be one of the points of advancing, creating better curriculum, creating a commitment to the truth and a commitment to change. On the other hand, we have a ambivalence towards unions because of our tenuous relationship. How do we get around that? How do we move to really, with abandon, force or invite organized unions to support the direction we're talking about? What do you think?
Well, I'm not speaking on behalf of the NAACP because I'm not authorized to do so. But in recent years, we have held meetings with the head of Education Minnesota, with the head of the teachers union in St. Paul, the St. Paul Federation of Teachers. And they approached the NAACP and said, listen, we want to be a part of the solution to this issue. We don't want to be a part of the problem. And the president of the St. Paul Teachers Federation co-authored an opinion piece which the NAACP and the teachers union submitted and was printed in the St. Paul Pioneer Press, attacking segregation in the St. Paul public schools. In their collective bargaining agreement, they demanded that the school district initiate a significant discussion on segregation in the schools, and the school district implemented a task force to examine segregation in the St. Paul public schools. I think one step, Al, would be to invite the presidents of the Minneapolis and St. Paul Federation of Teachers and Education Minnesota, the three, to appear on the program and ask them what they're doing to support this effort to teach true American history in the schools, to teach about slavery, to teach about the truth as it relates to American history, and to do it in a way that is mutually beneficial for all the students in the classroom. See, the fear is that we're doing something for Black students at white students' expense, and that's not the case. Mm-hmm. Black students are as ignorant about our history in far too large a proportion as the white students. And if this is truly American history, then all of the students deserve to be exposed to it, not just African American students. And the whole notion of Black History Month, we have White History Month 12 months out of the year.
Every day.
Surely the fact that we have it the shortest month of the year shouldn't be, cause for people to crank out crocodile tears. And the reality is that we emphasize the contributions of Black people to humanity, not just to Black people. Daniel Hale Williams, who performed the first open heart surgery, didn't just do it for Black people, did it for everybody. Charles Drew, who invented blood plasma, didn't just invent it for Black people. Millions of white people have been saved by the inventions of African Americans. Black inventors right here in Minnesota, Fred, what was Fred's last name? Worked for Thermo King. Invented the refrigeration unit, invented the soundtrack for motion pictures, invented a gas mask, and had to hire a white man to demonstrate it to the federal government because they accused him of practicing witchcraft because he wore it into a mine and rescued a dozen miners in Ohio after an explosion with poison gas.
Let me do this, Yusef. We're down to the last 4 or 5 minutes here. I wanted to take a second to focus on something you brought up earlier. I brought up, I think, and that is this reminding us of Reconstruction. After the Emancipation Proclamation, many of the legislatures in the South in particular were able to elect and place Black members of their states in the House of Representatives and in the Senate. Many of the state legislatures had Blacks representing the community, but it all took a sudden and decided turn as Jim Crow emerged. Describe kind of that process, what the hope was, what the vision, the expectation, the aspirations were for the notion of freedom for the 4 million or so Africans that have been, in a sense, had taken their freedom from the bondage, state of bondage. And then describe the process of how the forces of evil, what I call it, turned the clock back and created a new version of slavery. How does that relate to where we are right now? And therefore, Yusuf, what must we do? Not only we, the Africans, but we people of conscience and we people that are committed to this notion of recognizing the humanity of every human being. What do you think, Yusuf?
Well, today, Jim Crow has developed into Dr. James Crow, okay? And we see this in terms of the legislation in 48 states to suppress the votes of low-income people and people of color, primarily Black people. One judge in North Carolina looked at a redistricting map, looked at the closing of early registration stations and said, even Ray Charles could see that this legislation is aimed directly at the African-American community and deemed it illegal and threw it out. The voter suppression took many forms. One, there were literacy tests that were given to slaves. If they couldn't pass it, they couldn't vote. Two, there was fear and intimidation in terms of economic sanctioning, in terms of imprisonment, in terms of ostracizing from the white power structure for anybody who even considered applying to vote. And in places like Mississippi, where Black people almost made up a majority of the population, the number who were successful in registering to vote was a few hundred, out of many tens of thousands. And we've seen that around the country. What do we have to do about it? Number one, there are legislative proposals in several states to give people voting cards and to enlist them on the rolls of eligible voters on their 18th birthday. Okay, they get a driver's license, they're eligible for the draft, and they also are eligible to vote. Number two, we have to insist that the people in our families, as African Americans, as concerned citizens, take advantage of the right to vote. But that means that we have to be educated and we have to be informed. So we're not going in the polling booth and throwing a dart at who we want to support. 12% of African American males voted for Donald Trump, okay? And they had every right to do that. But we've got to educate people. We've got to advocate for positive changes in voting rights. There's the brother who got hit over the head on the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma, Alabama. There's a John Lewis Act that has been stalling in Congress. It passed the House, but it has yet to pass in the Senate to renew the strengths that were in the Voting Rights Act nationally. We're fortunate that
Yusuf, I think we're out of time, Yusuf.
I'm sorry.
Listen, brother, always so good to talk to you. Let's do it again. And those are good ideas about bringing the union people to the show. I'm Al McFarlane. This is The Conversation. We'll see you next time.
Thank you, brother.